today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you a VR to the hashtag failtales by the Norse Witch. I filmed this back in September of 2024, so it was quite late when I filmed it. It's even later on now, but I still am really keen to share because it was an area that I really wanted to dive into. I really feel that I've learned some significant lessons over the years practicing. So get yourself a nice hot drink, settle back, relax, and enjoy some real talk with this witch. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. I hope that you are well and safe and looking after yourselves and that this video finds you well. I am here in the woods with Coco. We're taking a nice little walk, an autumnal walk, and it's so beautiful out here. It's not too hot, it's not too cool, it's just perfect, and it has been wet over the last few weeks, so I'm wearing my wellies, but it's probably not going to be as wet as it usually gets in like the depths of winter, and then like January, February tends to be like the most wet. I thought today that I would film a VR to Bente, the Norse Witch, with the failtales tag, and I thought this was so apt because I actually had a list of like things that have gone wrong and mistakes that I've made in my practice, and I've been wanting to make this video for the last year and a half or so, but I kept putting it off because certain things on the list I wasn't sure about speaking to really candidly and openly on YouTube because of that whole, you know, trolling, etc. But I thought maybe like I could speak more to it on Patreon, but I just thought this was just the perfect opportunity. Now I'm able to like come out and it's such a nice thing to do, to talk about these ways in which we fail. You know, obviously it doesn't necessarily mean, you know, we're failing, but it's nice to share those things we've learned, because then we don't feel quite so alone, and the things that challenge us, the things that like we've made mistakes with, because I've made so many mistakes in my practice, like over the years, especially when I was younger. But then even like as an adult, I made so many mistakes as well. And you learn such a lot over years and over practice. Nothing is black and white, nothing is set in stone. There's so much nuance to everything. It's like shades of grey. So yeah, I'm really excited to film a VR to this. I have Coco still on the lead because sometimes she does this thing where she like runs away, little monkey. So she's still on the lead and the lead's in my pocket and it's just tangled around my legs. Right, shall I take you off the lead? Yes, I'll take you off there. So failtales. Before I get into it, I want to start by saying these are my experiences. It's the kind of usual disclaimer, you know, this does not mean that this is like a monolith. It doesn't mean that like everyone has experienced this or this is the truth across the board. You know, this is just what I've experienced in the years that I've practiced since I started, you know, learning about Wicca and practicing Wicca when I was 11 and through my teens, and developing different abilities and working with different modalities and learning about different traditions and different worldviews, different paradigms, etc. And as my practice evolved over the years and my beliefs took shape, this is not to say this is across the board true and that it's the only truth. Also, kindness is king. I really do believe that, and I honestly do believe that most people, you know, they're just doing their best, but I'm not going to accept trolling, rude, snide, snarky, nasty comments, and people, if they come with that energy, I'm just going to remove and block, because I just don't want that in my space, not just for me, but also for the people who watch. So I just want this to be like a safe and supportive, loving, nurturing place for people to come, and that's genuinely my intention with these videos. And I suppose that leads on quite nicely to something that I think I spoke to a few years ago when I made a video about the things I wish I'd known when I first became a witch. It's really kind of a life lesson, but it's that not all people are gonna be nice people or good people. Not all people have the best intentions, and like I just said, I think most people do, but not all people. But I do tend to be one of these people who I give people the benefit of the doubt, and it's not that I'm like weak or naive, or I think maybe at one point I was naive. It's not that I'm weak or naive or a pushover, but I do tend to put high value on other people and give people the benefit of the doubt. And I have been burnt before by that in many scenarios and situations. So another thing I did want to say at the start is that not all of my experiences have been consistent across the board, because that's not, things aren't really consistent. You know, there's consistency with some things, but it's not consistent that there's consistency, if that makes sense. So I've had some experiences with some things that have gone one way, some experiences with other things where I've done the same thing, but it's gone like a different way. So it's figuring out the variables and what was different and why. And I think I've got a good handle on some of that. And so basically, one big thing that I learned over my time practicing is about being impassioned when you're casting. Because I've experienced times when I have cast in a very impassioned state and the results have been phenomenal. Like, so perfect. Just absolutely spot on. And you know, I'm very specific with the words I speak. I'm very specific and intentional with whatever I write. If it's an intention they write down on a petition, I'm very intentional. And again, learnt that over trial and error, right? But it depends on the circumstances around which you're casting, because I have noticed that whilst being impassioned has created some amazing results whilst spell working, it's also created some unexpected and not so great results, whereby things did go according to the plan, but they weren't very desirable, as it turned out. And the difference, I think, with it was my attachment to the outcome. So when I had an attachment that was really for someone else's needs, someone else I cared about, and it was really important for me that this worked and manifested in the way that I wanted, it just worked out so well. I've been impassioned and it's worked. Like I said, it's not always across the board, but I have had a few occasions where I've been casting for me, and the results, because I've been attached so strongly, the outcome, although it was what I wanted, it wasn't really desirable in the end. Even with the intentional words, you know, nothing dangerous, nothing where anyone got hurt, thank goodness. Like, I'm very good at making sure that doesn't happen because of the words I speak or the intentions I set. But the energy was just not a good, energetic situation to be in. And I definitely made that worse for myself with the impassioned spell working that I performed. As I said, not always across the board, so because there have been things that I've wanted to manifest and I've been impassioned. You know, when I say impassioned as well, like sometimes angry, sometimes crying, emotional. So tears, I use tears a lot in my practice. They're so healing and so beautiful, and they do really, really work. But like more anger, like where there was anger involved, in those situations, when it was for someone else, it worked a treat. When it was for me and there was anger and an attachment, it didn't work so well. And I had to just remove myself from that. It just, I think the same thing would have occurred had I not cast, but it was just more intense, I think, because I cast. And instead of using the energy in that way, I could have used the energy in more of a protective way for myself in that scenario. So that's something I learned from it. But I do believe that being impassioned is so powerful. But it's about attachment and your attachment levels. So I've been impassioned before, you know, in a state of kind of joy and ecstasy and excitement. I call that impassioned. And, you know, cast was something I wanted, and it happened. It happened exactly as I wanted, all worked out, and that was great. So it's not like a hard and fast rule. And this is again where it comes back to like the knowing yourself part, and this thing I talk to all the time about showing up, how you're showing up, who you are inside, and knowing yourself, doing that inner work. And it's not just shadow work, you know, it's not about just uncovering shadows and then leaving them. It's not that. That is important to do, but if you're not safe to do that without someone else, I do think that, you know, having a therapist to do that with you is great. But if you've been through therapy, you may be feeling strong enough to do stuff like that on your own, and if you can, that's great. And shadow work is not just journaling and tarot spreads, and many of you know that. I know you do. I'm not teaching you how to suck eggs or whatever it is. That phrase is so funny. You know how to do that. I know so many of you are strengthening yourselves and your light bodies and transmuting pain and turning it into gold, right? That is alchemy. You're alchemists. That is what we're doing. And so I'm not telling you what to do or what not to do. Just that knowing yourself part, the kind of basis of the pyramid, I guess. It's so important. So that is, I guess, a fail tale, a lesson, mistake, that I've made, and it's really about being impassioned. That can go so well, but it can also just go slightly wrong. So just knowing your intentions and knowing really what it is that you want out of this and why. Like, are you trying to show someone something that, you know, you don't necessarily need to show them? Like, do you care too much what someone thinks? Or is it about you being empowered and being protected and moving through the world in a strong, empowered, graceful, beautiful way? What is it about? A core lesson for me. Another area I want to talk about is very much like all intertwined. I think this about a lot of things. Like, a lot of things I think are holistic, especially body, mind, spirit, etc. You know, when you work with healing modalities, you get to learn like these things are all linked, right? So the way I'm showing up, the beliefs I have about myself, they very much affect my magic. I know for myself, I've always been quite an anxious person. Don't know if you can tell that. I tend to float away quite a lot. My astrological chart is made up primarily of water and then fire. So that's kind of explosive. But then there's some air, virtually zero earth. And so for me, although like I love earth, I love the element of earth. And earth magic is what I do a lot of. I think I probably do more earth magic than I do fire magic or water magic, but I think it's because I have to. I have to, because otherwise I will just float off or I'll explode. So I'm a little bit like I've got a hot air balloon like attached to me and I'll just go floating off. So I like to stay grounded, and I don't just mean like in a psychic way, because I do get psychic downloads, I do get psychic knowing, clairsentience, I get clairgustance sometimes, and I get clairaudience, so I do hear things, usually in the hypnagogic state before I fall asleep. I've had clairaudient experiences in waking life as well, and sometimes it is actually audible. Just a warning, you have those symptoms, you should get them checked out. Like, I don't have anything that it could be medically, so I know that's legitimately clairaudience there, and it is audible sometimes. Other times it is in the mind's ear, if that makes sense, like the mind's eye. It's like a voice, you hear it, but you're hearing it in your head. So it's both. Same with the clairvoyance, like I see things with my eyes sometimes, but more frequently with my mind's eye, with my third eye, I see things. So that does happen. So that is probably the air and the water combined. But what I mean is, I don't mean I'm going to float away spiritually and just kind of become like a light body and do all this light working. You know, I feel like a shadow walker myself. But I don't feel that you can be a shadow walker without being a light walker as well. Like, I have a light body, it's very light, and it's also dark, both. You know, like, it's getting into another topic completely, but what I mean when I say I'm going to float off is just the anxiety and the kind of like panic, like anxiety, oh my gosh, like seeing Inside Out 2, which I didn't go and see in the cinema. I didn't want to see it because Disney is funding the... So I didn't want to see it, but it's free now for us, and I watched it, and I so relate to the character of anxiety, or like I can feel when anxiety has taken over in my body, and that is exactly what happens. Like, it is coming up with all these scenarios and making me panic more, but it thinks it's supporting me, it thinks it's helping me. I get that every day. So that's what I mean when I say like grounding is so important for me and being in these spaces, and I think maybe that's why I like to do these videos in these spaces, because it keeps me grounded, even though I might go floating off. Going back to the psychic abilities, the downloads, things that come through, messages from the divine, I struggle with remembering them and carrying those things through. When I was younger, less so, but now I think being a mum and having the adult challenges and physical challenges, mental health challenges, I do struggle to remember and retain information. And I like to just think that it's going in somehow, and that whatever is important will be for me, that will come through again. But yeah, sometimes things will be retained and other times they won't. But so usually I'll get clairaudience in between awake and asleep, so in that liminal hypnagogic state I will receive downloads, words. Sometimes that will be multiple voices talking, and I think that it's not so much a message for me, but it's just people talking and I can hear them. So again, it's about being able to discern. That's challenging. I struggle with that, and I struggle with turning off as well. So that's something that has been an ongoing thing I've worked to. Same with images and pictures coming through at the most awkward times, and when you ask for assistance, or you ask for knowledge and you ask for messages, and when it comes through at like the most inconvenient time. But I try not to put pressure on myself, because I feel like it's all in alignment and it's as it's supposed to be. You know, I'm not using the abilities I have in a professional way. So where I have my own personal ethics and morals and moral code, you know, I don't need to particularly adhere to making sure that I'm practicing ethically for anyone else, because I'm not, you know, doing a job for someone else with those talents. So I'm not working on it to a degree where I need to be responsible and worrying about other people who are paying me or anything like that. So in the future, if that's something I want to do, I will. I mean, obviously with tarot reading, that's slightly different because I do get psychic downloads when I'm reading tarot. In that case, yes. So I think that remembering the information and also being able to kind of channel the information to discern where the message is coming from sometimes is challenging, and then being able to switch it off, very challenging. So those are things, again, strengthening those skills that, you know, I've practiced those psychic skills since I was a teenager, been able to like see auras and things like that. And so it's like art, or like, you know, something that you do, you have to practice it. So that's been a lesson. I do think sometimes that my mental health does inhibit me because I expect a lot of myself and I beat myself up. And so that's again why self-love, self-care is such a big important part of my practice, in that having that self-worth and that time for myself, you know, to be embodied and to be mindful of where I am at, because I need to be kind to myself. And I think that I'm very, very tolerant and kind to other people, and I expect a lot less of other people than I do of myself. I expect a huge amount of myself, and I'm really unkind to myself. So catching those voices, if they come up, those limiting beliefs don't serve me, and working through them and working to transmute them, transform them like a phoenix from the ashes, rising and transmuting like an alchemist boss bitch. That's a lifetime's work that I'm still doing and that will last me a lifetime, I'm sure. But yeah, I'm not very kind to myself, and when I perceive myself as making mistakes, which I think I do a lot, I am very unkind to myself. I set myself massive goals about what I can achieve and being productive, and then when I fail to meet those and to meet that criteria, I am not kind to myself. So that's been something that as a young person I did that a lot, especially with studies, you know, getting the grades, etc. Type A person and being someone who experienced an eating disorder, you know, I'm sure that many of you are familiar with that. Like, that is something that is kind of the case with girls particularly who suffer with disordered eating, and was my case, you know, very type A, very perfectionist. So I expect too much of myself often, and I beat myself up when I don't meet that. I will have these ideas that I want to read a certain amount. I try and read too much, I try and practice too much, and then nothing gets processed. So slowing down is really, really important, because otherwise you can't assimilate the information. I have talked about that on the channel before as well. I definitely give other people and friends particularly like more grace and love than I give to myself. So again, that kindness piece, treating myself like a best friend would treat me. Trying to learn too much at once and not being able to process it. Definitely having too many things to do, like on the list, is really distracting for one, but also, yeah, it's really hard to actually assimilate and learn and grow and alchemize, you know, and to integrate any shadows, reintegrate any shadows, or to alchemize. It's really, really hard to do that if you're not giving yourself the space to grow into what you've learned. It's the same with tarot reading. If you do too many tarot readings, you're not actually putting what you learn into practice, then what good is it? Another thing that's definitely linked to that is starting lots of projects and study goals. Again, it's the same thing, but it's like I don't necessarily finish them, but there are some things I do finish. Like I said, some things are consistent, other things aren't consistent. There's no consistency to the consistency. Not everything I say is like a rule, because sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But basically, the things that stick, I know they're for me. When I learned tarot, I learned it inside out, and then I kept going, kept going. It's not that I finished, but I did get to a point where I was like, right, I can do this now. That started when I was 17, and you know, it's still something that is big in my life, and that love never goes away. There are other things that are slow burns, like astrology. Like, I love astrology, and for me, I've learned enough now for it to be really powerful for my own practice of shadow work and understanding what's going on in my life, but I'm not yet at the point where I can help anyone else with their journey. I've not finished my studies, so it's a slow burn, but I still know it's for me. But then there are other things that, like certain people's perspectives, like certain traditions maybe. I've dabbled into learning about Reiki. I'm still yet to do my third, but I think that will come in time. I'm very happy with understanding what is for me. And I feel like when I start a project and I don't necessarily finish it, it's not always because it's not for me, not always. Sometimes it's time and limitations. So sometimes there'll be more time in my life for art, magic, and sketching and drawing and painting, which I love, and other times there'll be less. Sometimes there'll be loads of time for journaling and hypersigil work, journaling for what you want. And I've just found a penny. I'm not going to pick it up though. I'm going to leave it for somebody else. And I would say as well the routine thing, because of the way I am as a person. You know, if you're watching this video, if you're watching any of my other videos, you'll have an idea of who I am as a person and my mental health challenges, physical challenges, my creative work, the, you know, emotional, sensitive kind of person I am, fiery, emotional, watery. I am very connected to spirit, but I'm very intuitive and organic with my processes. I might make a plan. I'm going to do a certain spell for a full moon or a new moon, and it doesn't end up happening, but it'll happen like the next time or down the road. But I do feel that oftentimes, like when I enchant, when I cast, there's a number of spells that go into that casting. Like I've talked about that before. It's like a long process. A lot of castings, they're not just one spell and done. Some of them are quick and dirty, but others, it's not that they necessarily are like an hour-long ritual, and that's why they're not quick and dirty. They're not quick and dirty because they're different workings, all linked, all connected for the same thread of intention. It's as and when, you know, it's a bit like the wind. Yeah, I don't want to be too twee about it, but I feel very much like Pocahontas. Pocahontas like really resonated with me when I was a kid, like running through the woods, being in the trees. And Ariel, Little Mermaid, I mean, she obviously wanted to go to Earth, but like I wanted to go in the sea. I wanted to be in the sea. Being close to nature, you know, I will often get this pull to just be in the woodlands on my own. And I don't want to do it in a way that's not safe, but that's the urge I get, like to go at night and to just camp and be on my own. I know that's not safe, but instead I'll just go with Coco. So I can have all these elaborate rituals and things planned and a routine planned, but it won't go to plan. It never does. But I like that. I like that about my practice. It's very organic. It's very based on the land where I am at. And it's evolved that way, you know, as I've grown into who I am as a person, and it's evolved that way where I've lived, you know, and the stage of my life. You know, there were times when it was much more about the art that I created. But everything I would say has always been very intuitive and very organic. And I would say that that is where the power is for me, following that, trusting that guide, that inner wisdom, and not veering off course of that, and not being distracted, not listening to others, and just trusting. Yeah, I did speak to this a little bit as well in one of my previous videos when I spoke about how I have internalized the abuse and bullshit that I've basically gotten from other people because I put boundaries in place, or I strengthened my boundaries, or I did something to keep myself safe. For instance, took myself out of a scenario where I was being bullied, took myself out of it, and then other people were angry at me because I took myself out of that space and decided to throw abuse my way and spread rumours about me and lies. You know, this is what people do when they don't like someone or they are threatened by someone. A lot of it is projection, and I definitely think that I have internalized that and thought, well, then it's me, it's my fault. And obviously I'm not saying that I've never been someone who's done something wrong. I've often made mistakes, but if I do say something that hurts someone else, or if I do something that hurts someone else, I will own up to it. You know, if I know that I'm in the wrong, that is something that I do. I'll own up to it and I will say sorry and I'll do better. That's something I've always prided myself on. That is something I have. So I'm not saying I'm perfect. I think that like I will own up to my own shit, I have also internalized other people's shit as my own. And even as an adult, you know, that's happened up until recently, like where people who I thought were people who cared about me actually were bullshitting and gossiping behind my back, spreading lies, doing really shady, shitty things. I've had that situation in relationships and in my personal life as well as in my professional life, and it's just bullshit. It's toxic, it's horrid. And I think that I am just naturally a hypersensitive, highly sensitive person. I am someone who sees the good in people, and that's just who I am, but I've taken a lot of shit for it. So what can I take out of that? Just not to allow it to turn me into a bitch, because that's the danger, right? When you get abused or treated like badly, that you then turn into a bit of a cold-hearted monster yourself. So when I've caught myself like wanting to ghost someone or detach from someone, or when I, you know, I'm thinking of them in a really negative way, like thinking, oh, this person's such a bitch, you know, because they've done this to me. Just try and soften it a little bit and be like, well, yeah, like what they did to you was wrong, but they had their reasons because they were suffering with what they were suffering with. And Emily, that wasn't you, that was on them. So just let them do that. You know, if you've done anything wrong in that situation, and you know you've owned up to it, you've tried to be the best friend you could be, or the best worker you could be, you know, you've tried your best, and where you haven't, you've owned up. So I've caught myself wanting to be mean, wanting to hold on to negative emotions, but at the end of the day, that doesn't serve me. So it's just releasing that and sending that person healing, love, and the best for them in the future going forward, you know, and just, but I can move on without them in my life, you know, and that's the best thing for me. So that's where I'm at with that, and that's definitely a fail tale, but not like a fail tale just for magic, it's a life fail tale. But that's how I guess I have managed to protect my boundaries whilst also remaining a kind person, I guess, by just releasing and letting go and forgiving, you know, not that forgiveness is always earned or deserved by the person who's wronged you or hurt you, but that it's something that you do for yourself. That is one thing that is a big takeaway for me. So I want to talk a little bit about egregores and thought forms and servitors, which is a practice that I know myself and I know others who have practiced this way for a long time before they knew about what chaos magic was, before they knew about these paradigms in which these practices are really popular. They were doing this work. It's the same for me and for others I've spoken to about sigils, drawing symbols and images, and they were wrapped up with intentions and doodling when you're a little and screwing them up and throwing them away, or scribbling them out, or you know, whatever. I think a lot of people do before they know really what the practice of sigil making is, and hypersigils as well. Like I've talked about that, how I used to journal things that I wanted to come to pass, or I used to re-journal things that had happened, like rewriting it to sort of shape my mind in a way that I wanted, you know, to sort of work neurologically, you know, those thought patterns, get to that part of the mind, neurological pathways, those neurological pathways. I know for myself, and I know that others have had this, but creating thought forms, egregores and servitors, it sort of closely aligns with that whole imaginary friend thing, which I know a lot of people laugh at, but it's the case for I think a lot of people who are magically minded. I definitely talked to spirits, land spirits and sea spirits when I was little, but I also had several literary characters that became a lot more real in my life than they were in the books. I had adventures with those characters that were not written about. I often actually would write those down, write stories of them, but those things took on other life forms within my life and helped me, and arguably were part of me. I also have a background as a performer. I went to an acting dance school. You know, we studied a lot of method acting, Stanislavski's methods. There are areas where that overlaps with ritual, of course. Performing arts and ritual overlap, especially when you're talking about different cultural rituals and rites of passage, but also from a perspective of theatre, improvisation, performance art. This is still an area that I'm kind of deepening into, because I wasn't aware of that sort of side of it when I was at university. I just thought it was the theatre aspect of it. Of course, a lot of it was to do with the stuff that I was practicing anyway. So a lot of the meditation techniques that I learned as a young person through my mum, and going to yoga with her, or like she had meditation tapes and such, these relaxation techniques, and then tapping into energies above and below for grounding, and then also higher energies like that. I would do that, but that is a lot of what I would do in theatre classes as well. When I was young, I started going to a theatre school on a weekend when I was about 12, so it was very similar practices, and so it all kind of came together. But when you're in that world, then you take on aspects of these characters that you're performing. Oh my gosh, I have rambled so much about this. But I think when you're working magically and intentionally, it can become rather dangerous, where the strength of the characters can start to take over a little bit. And I found this to be the case with one servitor that I created for a specific task, but I was thinking that the servitor would stay around a little bit. I had to terminate it because it became overpowering. It was designed to be fiercely protective. Go, go. This way, come. obviously servitors are a part of you, you're a part of them, you create them. And I have a whole way of creating servitors that I've practiced. And I do have a servitor that I have that protects my space and my home, but it's very protective, just protective. Whereas this servitor was designed to be fiercely protective for a specific reason. It took on a life of its own, and it ended up getting me into more trouble than it was worth. It wasn't such a bad scenario, really. It didn't end all that badly. I think that ultimately it just was more fierce than protective. It was very strong. It had alerts and warnings for me, and they all went off, you know, when the boundaries were being triggered, when things were being pushed. These all came into place, right? So when the boundary was crossed, a noise occurred. When a boundary was crossed, the person crossing it would be incredibly itchy. That also happened. So a number of things like that, I was just like, wow, like it was more powerful than I ever could have imagined, but not in a good way, because it just didn't serve me in the way I wanted it to. I think it was too fierce. It didn't hurt anyone, it didn't hurt me. I would say it was just more fierce than it was protective, and it had a bit of a malevolent air about it, a bit of a just mean girl air about it that I didn't really want it to. But I guess looking back, you know, the design I had for it, it was pretty fierce. So I think, yeah, it was just a little bit too far. It didn't do any damage. I don't think it would have either, but it didn't feel right, and so I terminated it, and that was actually really sad. I still have its vessel, and you know, I still feel really grateful to that spirit, that entity, and I think it really helped me actually in the long run. It helped me to release some of the pain around the area it was helping me with. So ultimately, failtale, yes, it was very strong. It didn't have the desired effect necessarily, but yeah, ultimately everything turned out for the best with it. So I don't have any regrets, but I think I could have done it better. I've created servitors that have been a lot more tempered, a lot simpler in their kind of construction and in their intentions, and I think that maybe that was the key with it. Again, going back to that impassioned perspective. When something has an attachment and maybe there's fear around it as well. I think there was an element of fear when I created that servitor, and I think that is potentially why it turned out to be a little bit more intense than I thought initially and that I initially desired. So another fail I would say is definitely around ethics with practices and judgment, and that was when I was a lot younger, when I was a teenager and practicing, and I mostly did spells to keep bullies away and to make friends and to get boyfriends, things. And I definitely have experienced that thing where you cast because you like someone, and then you get their attention and they like you too, and then you end up getting kind of screwed over, or they notice you but it's not right. Or I've cast for, you know, romance boyfriend things in my teens, and when they became interested I was just not interested and they wouldn't leave me alone. So things like that. But also I think having cast for certain people and then not them but like their friend will suddenly be interested. And so it's just like that, like I would say those are fail tales from a very young witch. And you know, I think that young witches now are probably a lot wiser than I was back then. You know, it was less resources. I'm not saying it's an excuse. I meddled, you know, I was foolish as a teenager, as a young person. I came to this when I was 11. So I'm cautious around talking about things like that on the channel because I don't want people to think that I take it flippantly or that it's frivolous or that I would do that now. That was when I was a young person, when I was 11, 12, 13, not now. And I know better, and I know that also because of the resources available, a lot of young people coming to the craft now know better. So it is a lesson in not messing with people's free will because it will tend to just backfire. It's never really been dangerous for me, but you know, just not ideal. I wouldn't want anyone else to have that. There is another form of magic that I am not great at, and that is money magic. And I think it is because I have an innate sense of everything working out. Like I'm kind of like a cat with 9 lives. Like I fall and I'll bounce back, because whilst I'm privileged, I have had some shitty situations in my life, and I've always been quite resilient, so I have a feeling that I'll bounce back. And I, for a long time, have had affirmations and knowing and spell work for everything just being okay and working out, and so I always have enough to get by, and I sort of always seem to just fall on my feet. But it's not like abundance. You know, I have a home and I'm very, very lucky and blessed. But like, there's several scenarios or ways my life could have gone where I wouldn't have had that. And it's kind of like I just fell on my feet. I don't see it as something that I've particularly earned, even though I've worked all my life. I think the reason is that I've always been in jobs that haven't really paid me that much. And so whilst, you know, I have a first class honours degree and, you know, I've worked my bottom off, I've been working since I was about 14. I've worked weekends and worked nights, and I've done waitressing jobs. I've done all kinds of jobs, customer service and stuff. And I knew that for me, like, working in some form of creative arts was what I needed. And my Mercury is in Cancer as well as my moon. And so writing, something that does come very easy to me, but it was very flowery, right? Naturally very poetic and flowery. And so writing as a career, I've learned to hone the art of being concise and clear, because when you're writing journalism in magazines or for like websites for brands, you need to be commercial, you need to be direct, you need to be clear, it needs to be compelling and entertaining. It's not a poetry book. When I studied English literature, I did a lot of poetry. That's something that I love, and I do love my job, but I've learned to be a lot more clear and concise. But essentially, I kind of live in that floaty, artistic way through life, and things kind of fall into my lap, I feel. Even though I work my bum off, I don't get paid very well for what I do. And I think that is an area that I struggle at. It's not that I don't see myself as deserving, and I've seen this happen to some people I love as well. Some of the most talented, most intelligent people I know should have the most amazingly lucrative, successful careers in the arts. I don't particularly think it was because they didn't think that they deserved it. It was just something about them was very lovely, kind, genuine, and they were kind of taken for a ride. I know a few people that have experienced this, and I feel that that's how I've felt as well. Like, I did 9 internships in magazines when I was working as a young person in London. You know, I worked for free for years for magazines, and it wasn't, it still is, they're actually getting people to pay now to write for magazines. So like, actually working for free that was a privilege. You know what, it was a privilege as well, because I wouldn't have been able to afford it had my parents not been there to support me with train fares and stuff, and my partner. You know, so I am privileged that I was able to do those free internships, because that is something that many people could not do. Just like many people can't go to university. So I'm very privileged. But that's the thing, I kind of feel, not that I'm not deserving, but just sort of like I kind of fall on my feet. I get the bare minimum, I get what I need, and I also somehow manage to get nice things as well, because I kind of attract them. I attract nice things, like I like luxurious things, but I don't have this abundance coming to me because of what I do. And therefore I think I have this mindset that is not, you know, the best for money magic. And so when I do money magic, it's often, I don't tend to do spells for like quick money, but you know, what will often happen is that I have an ongoing money bowl that I've had for a long time, and I refresh it every so often. I'll clean it out and refresh it, I'll redo it, but it just keeps things ticking over. So I'm just always okay, and then if something comes in, I'll get like randomly a couple of hundred to help sort me out and get me back to level. But it's not like this abundance. I guess, you know, it's comfortable, but it's not comfortable in the way that I don't have to worry. And I think that's the thing that I'd like to get to. There's some trash here. Coco's just walked over it. So just part of the serving the space is picking up trash. And I shouldn't have really picked it up with my fingers, but I did have a litter picker, but it broke. So my plan is to get another litter picker so that I can come out and do litter picking, because I don't like it. And I always try and pick up when I see it, if I can. So I think that that has been an area that I've been working on for a long time, and the self-love, self-care, self-worth work that I do, it really, really helps to support that, because it's getting me to a place where not only do I feel like I deserve it and that I've worked for it, but that it's mine, and that it just is, it's mine. It already is, it just is. So I'm working on that, but that's not something that has come easily to me, although, you know, some might think it has, because I'm just okay. Just everything is ticking along okay. I've done money spells in the past, and quite honestly they haven't worked in the same way that other spells have, but I do believe it's those blockages that I'm working on fixing. So there. That's that lesson. that leads nicely into the anxiety and the mental health side of it. Now, I want to be really careful with this because it's not a fail, but it is worth talking about because a few decades ago, being in the witchcraft community, you were thought of as someone who wasn't able to practice witchcraft if you had any mental health conditions. So I have physical conditions, so I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia and I've had chronic pain and chronic fatigue for a few years. I will just say here, it's a trigger warning if you don't want to hear about mental health conditions, especially like eating disorders. I have had anxiety since I was a teenager. I've experienced disordered eating, an eating disorder. To say it like that, for some reason it's hard to say it. Anxiety, and then postnatal depression, also post-traumatic stress disorder after my kids were born, because my daughter was born with group B strep. She was very sick. Basically, group B strep can be fatal for babies. It can also cause brain damage and such. There is a little bit of information I read about the connection between group B strep and autism or neurodivergence, so that's potential, but I believe I am neurodivergent as well myself. I haven't been diagnosed, although I have taken tests, and I feel it within myself, and I have a number of friends who are either autistic or have ADHD and believe that that is the same for me, because they're also really close friends and resonate, and we always have, and you know, I think they're the most beautiful people in my life. You know who you are if you're watching. And I love you. These things, they're not fails, but there was a time when you were kind of considered to be unable to practice witchcraft if you suffered with depression or mental health conditions. I've talked about these a lot on my channel, right? You know, it's something I've never hidden. I also did a reel like a really long time ago about the most important daily practice, which is taking your meds. Well, taking my meds. It was really important. Still is. We'll stand by that. I believe actually it's not a fail. It's definitely not a fail. It's not my fault, and it's seen often as a problem. It's definitely a challenge, but it's actually beautiful and it's a superpower, okay? And I don't mean that in like a love and light, like making someone with a disability or a disadvantage into like a rainbow child or anything like that. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that I have a number of things like synesthesia. Being an HSP, highly sensitive person, I believe these things are like part of the key to my magic. Synesthesia especially, like I've always experienced that as a child. I just sort of thought everyone did. So I saw colours with music and I feel different. I feel things that aren't there. I feel like I have different limbs. Sometimes I can feel wings. I feel tails sometimes, like it's things like that, and it comes in and out. You know, it's been more prominent in my life at other points, but it's always been with me, and I kind of thought that it was always the same. Like, so certain numbers or words will have flavors or colors. The number 8 has like a sensation. It's wild, I can't explain it. I'm always talking about the smell of the taste of things, and the way something looks has a taste, and things like other things. Sounds have flavors. It's pretty magical. It's pretty powerful. I didn't really even realize it was something different until recently, really, because it's just how I live my life. It makes things kind of special. Certain things will have certain flavors, and sometimes they're nice flavors and other times they're not. There's a lot that I think that comes from those neurodivergent, because technically it is kind of a neurodivergence, right? It's not a normal brain pattern, but it's very beautiful, and I think that it makes my magic kind of supercharged. Not that it's more special, more powerful, but for me, it is part of the power that I have. It's sacred and it's beautiful, and I wouldn't change it, but it's worth mentioning because it was stigmatized. There was a stigma, and there still is. So wanting to kind of come beyond that and not mentioning it here because it's a fail or a fail of mine or a disadvantage. I mean, like, yeah, I would say that there are challenges to having chronic pain, chronic fatigue, because you're exhausted and you can't do things. Also mental health reasons, you're burnt out, frazzled with life, in pain mentally, emotionally, and you just can't do the magic you want to do. But ultimately it's powerful. Some of it is powerful, and I think that it all links up to make me me. So it's worth mentioning that for that reason. And again, I just want to reiterate, this is my experience. It's not to say it's your truth, and there might have been things that I've not said in the best way. So I just want to reiterate that if anything I've said has been upsetting or offensive, I 100% will take ownership for that and apologise, and I'll try and do better. So, but also don't take that as a cue to come into my comments and slag me off. So I think I've rambled enough, shared some failings and some mishaps. I hope that this has been enjoyable. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you are well and safe and this finds you well. If you want to support me, I have links below, my Instagram and Patreon and an whole TikTok page. And just being here, liking, subscribing, sharing is amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for being here. Please leave me a little star emoji if you get to the end. Thank you also to Bente for this tag, and it's been really, really nice to hear everyone else's fail tales, so really enjoying those videos. Thank you so much for joining me. Stay well, and I look forward to seeing you again in another video really soon. Take care. Many blessings. Bye.